First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at febc.org.
Personhood means something now in the Christian faith. With AI mania and identity ideology, personhood is based on what you feel at the moment. And it's a terrible place to be. The anchor of truth of what you really are is found in the personhood of God.
We are about to meet a man who was a Muslim for many years before his conversion to Christ and now is a powerful apologist for the Christian faith. Stay with us for this edition of First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Our guest is Abdu Murray. You'll hear his story in just a few moments, but after listening, if you'd like to share Abdu's amazing account, please visit firstpersoninterview.com or use any podcast app to subscribe and download any of our programs. Just search for First Person with Wayne Shepherd. You can also follow this program on social media by going to facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. I hope you'll like and follow us there, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Now, let's hear Abdu Murray's story and talk about a book he's written warning about what he calls a reality collapse as a result of AI and gender confusion. The book is titled Fake ID, and we'll explore it with him as part of our conversation. But first, I ask Abdu to address his traumatic conversion to Christianity.
Basically, the story starts like this, is that I was raised as a Shiite Muslim in the United States. I was very, very proud of being a Muslim. And I would tell anybody who wasn't a Muslim why they were wrong and I was right. And I was sort of an evangelist or an apologist for Islam. And Christians were sort of low-hanging fruit. You know, I was going after people who were non-Muslims, whether they were Christians or Jews or Buddhists or Hindus or whatever it was, or atheists. But when I grew up, Christians were low-hanging fruit, so they were easy to pick. And I'd often ask the Christians a question. I'd say, why are you a Christian? And they would tell me, basically, that their tradition is why they were a Christian. They grew up Presbyterian or Lutheran or Catholic or whatever else it might be. I'd say, well, no, I'm not asking you, what are you? I'm asking you, why are you what you are? Give me a good reason. And most of them said things like, oh, you don't think these things through. You just are what you are. So I would say tradition, that's the reason you believe something. You're going to trust the eternal destiny of your soul to a worldview that someone else has thought through, but you haven't because of tradition. That's your reasoning. And they'd say, well, is there a better reason? I'd say, well, yeah, here's 5 reasons why you're wrong and 5 reasons you should be a Muslim. And what was interesting was, along the way, there were some Christians who actually knew what they were talking about and could respond not only to my objections, but could offer some objections of their own to my worldview of Islam. And so I began to study comparative religions while I was in college. And it was sort of something of a minor, not my major, but a minor. And then 2 guys came to the door of my apartment complex while I was at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And they were going door to door. These 2 Baptist guys were going door to door. And at that college town, they didn't get a whole lot of joy.
I wouldn't expect so, no.
No, but when they came to my door, I was like, oh my goodness, you guys deliver. This is great. Come on in. So they came into the apartment, and we made them uncomfortable for days and days at a time. They would come back every Thursday. And I love these guys because honestly, you could tell that they cared about my destiny, not just about being right. And I cared about their destiny. I wanted them to go to God's paradise. They wanted me to go to heaven. So we had a mutual love for one another, but a disagreement about how to get there. So I was reading the Bible to try to knock the faith out of these 2 guys, to show them a contradiction, that they couldn't possibly reconcile. And I come across Luke chapter 3, verses 7 and following. And John the Baptist is talking to people who are coming to him, and he says, who told you to flee from the wrath to come? Meaning, of course, God's judgment. And then he said something fascinating. He said, do not even begin to think to yourself that you have Abraham as your father. For I tell you, God can raise up children of Abraham from the stones. Essentially, what he's saying is tradition won't save you. Truth is what saves. And that convicted me because I realized that I had constantly been deriding Christians for why they believed what they believed because tradition wasn't a good enough reason. And John the Baptist was agreeing with me. But what he was really doing was he was arguing with me. He's like, you agree with me, but you also are hypocritically hanging on to your worldview for the same reason. So that started a shifted mindset in me that took 9 years. of studying Christianity and Islam and Hinduism, Buddhism, and other isms and schisms, all about whether or not any of these things is actually true. And I found the philosophical, historical, theological, scientific underpinnings of Christianity to be compelling. It not only made sense based on the corroborating evidence, but it made sense internally. All the concepts of Christianity made sense of each other, and they answered the biggest and most fundamental questions of life, not just propositional questions, but also existential questions, questions that matter to me personally. For example, Muslims believe that God is incomparably great. We hear the phrase all the time in the media, Allahu Akbar. Muslims chant this. But the reality is most Muslims say this as a prayer and a praise in everyday life. Those who are not interested in murdering anybody are saying Allahu Akbar, which means God is greater, as just a way to symbolize or to vocalize their appreciation for and devotion to a God who is incomparably great. Well, it occurred to me at the end of this 9 years that if God is truly great, then he would express the greatest possible virtue, which is love, and he would express it in the greatest possible way. And what is the greatest possible way to express love? It's clearly and obviously self-sacrifice. But Islam knows nothing of that. But the Christian faith, it's central to the Christian faith that self-sacrifice is the expression of love, and God expresses that virtue of love through the cross, which is self-sacrifice. So if God is the greatest possible being, as every Muslim hopes he is, then he must be the God of the Bible, the one who dies on a cross to save us from our sins, but doesn't stay that way, who rises from the dead to prove that death has no hold on him and therefore has no hold on us. When I realized that, and I saw it so perfectly stated in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, for God demonstrates his love for us, his greatest possible love, in that while we were sinners, not even those who love God, but those who hate God, that Christ died for us. That was the greatest possible being, especially in the greatest possible virtue, in the greatest possible way. And so when I realized that the 9-year search was over, that the journey had just begun, because now I get to explore who he really is. And I gave my life to Christ after 9 years in the year 2000.
Oh, wow. I've heard a lot of testimonies. That one is so interesting, the way that you were so thoughtfully engaged and did so over a period of time, as I'm sure you recognize now, the Spirit was wooing you and bringing you to faith. And just this morning in a Bible study, we were looking at Job, and at one point Job answers one of his friends, and he says, I have no mediator. I have no one. And we were just rejoicing that we now have that mediator. We have Christ.
We do indeed. And you're absolutely right. No one comes to the Father, but he first draw him. And God knows how I'm built. I'm built to need evidence. I'm built to need a rational reason to believe something, especially when believing that thing will cost me something. It was going to cost me lots of things, including and especially my religious identity, which was very important to me. So that's why it took 9 years. Honestly, it took 9 years, Wayne, because truth is not hard to find, but it is hard to accept. Because there's a consequence to it. And so that's why our ministry is called Embrace the Truth. It's not just know the truth, it's actually embrace it. Because knowing it is one thing. I intellectually assented to many of the truths of the Christian faith long before I embraced them. Because embracing required commitment. Assent just required intellectual agreement. And those aren't the same thing.
Well, you alluded to the cost. I'm sure you feel it's worth it, but I know you must have faced a cost. Family, culture. How did that go? Yeah,
so all those things in many, many ways were part of that cost. Identity was a huge one for me. I liked being known as a Muslim. I liked to be the kind of Muslim that Christians sort of quaked to speak to, and other Muslims liked to ask questions of. And of course, family stuff and all that as well. But I will tell you that my family is incredibly close. And God has really restored the years the locusts have eaten in many, many ways and drawn us close together. But that took persistence on all of our parts, and treating people as people who bear God's image no matter what. And I'm happy to say that these people I love dearly are in great relationship with me. But there was a cost to pay with regard to that for some time. But it is infinitely worth it. I'll tell you, when it was hardest to be a follower of Christ in light of all of that, it's when I felt closest to him.
Really?
And if you have never felt the closeness that comes from suffering for the sake of your belief, I actually, and I hate to say it this way, but I really do mean it. I hope that someone who's listening to this does get to experience what it's like to be close to God when you suffer because of your beliefs.
Again, Job, he found God through his suffering, didn't he?
He did indeed.
Yeah.
I love the end of Job, and I'm sure you love it too, is that, and C.S. Lewis sort of encapsulates it when he says that in my groanings and in my sufferings, I asked many questions and didn't get an answer, but I realized that now that, Job said, I heard about you, but now I see you. There is no adequate answer compared to you. You yourself are the answer.
We'll continue this conversation with author Abdu Murray coming up in just a moment on this edition of First Person.
Hi, I'm Ed Cannon, and as you know, situations around the world are changing quickly. Stay current with FEBC's ministry and get a deeper understanding of people who need to find hope. Hear how you can feel the pulse of God's Spirit moving through the hearts of believers dedicated to reaching the lost. Be sure you join me for the podcast Until All Have Heard.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is Abdu Murray. He is the author of Fake ID, How AI and Identity Ideology Are Collapsing Reality and What to Do About It. He's also the author of other books, and we'll put websites and more information, of course, in our program notes at firstpersoninterview.com. But this is your latest book. You say that AI and gender ideology together are leading to what you call a reality collapse. Let's talk about that. Explain that for us, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. I got this term from watching a video presentation about an hour long by Asa Raskin and Tristan Harris, who are AI researchers, who said that our contact with AI now, in its currently developed form, will lead to reality collapse. And they gave about like 20 different things it's going to lead to. And they gave reality collapse about 1.5 seconds of their time. So out of an hour-long presentation, they mentioned reality collapse for 1.5 seconds. And I thought, that word is haunting. Reality collapse, how can that be a small part of what you're talking about? So I wrote this book to discuss what I see when the research bears it out. When you look at what's going on culturally speaking, reality doesn't collapse, but our perception of reality collapses. So the two forces that I think exist right now are identity ideology, or more specifically, gender identity ideology, and what I'm calling AI mania. I want to make it clear, I'm not against AI.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, I'm actually in favor of it. I actually use it all the time, but I try not to use it generatively. In other words, I try not to use it to do stuff for me, rather to bounce ideas off of and to refine certain things or to do research, but I'm not going to use it to write things for me or to create things out of whole cloth for a very specific reason. And the research shows that you probably shouldn't use it for that reason. But AI mania is my issue. AI mania is where it is this sort of unabashed and unreserved embrace of artificial intelligence to do everything for us and to allow it to change reality as we perceive it. Deepfakes are a good example of this. This is just one example where you can have deepfake pictures or even video.
Sure.
Where someone can take a sample of anything, 3 seconds of video of me saying and doing something, and then create something completely fabricated, but it looks just like me saying and doing something.
Very
I never said or did.
I know. You can't discern reality from it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a small example of it, because what ends up happening with AI mania, for example, is the fundamental collapse of reality is not the videos you're watching or the essays you're reading or the paintings you think a human being actually painted, but an AI did. That's part of it. And I do talk about this. What really collapses is our sense of what it means to be human and whether or not we're actually made in God's image, or if there's even a God whose image we're made in. Those are the big collapses of reality from the AI side, and I can explain that in a second. The other thing is this identity ideology, which very evidently is telling us, don't believe your own eyes. Don't believe your own common sense. If someone says that they are a woman, even though they are clearly biologically and genetically a man, you are required to agree. You aren't required to be polite. You're required to agree and affirm. And that ultimately shapes your reality. But a big part of it for me is the reality collapse of those people who have gender dysphoria, people who are suffering through a psychological sort of mismatch between how they feel and how they actually are. We're not helping those people by telling them, change your body, or society will change how it views you, because we're letting underlying issues go. We're collapsing not only our reality in cowing to these fictions, but we're also collapsing the reality of people who actually suffer with genuine psychological trauma by affirming things that aren't true. And neither of those two things can be helpful. So AI mania, if we allow it to shape our reality, won't help us. And identity ideology, if we allow it to shape our reality, won't help anybody. And ultimately, that leads us astray.
And you say that this is actually leading us into and feeding this idea that we are gods ourselves. Yeah,
absolutely. So what I point out in the book is that there are two competing claims that we are required to believe as true at the same time, but can't possibly be true at the same time. So if they force us into what I call cultural schizophrenia, that we're trying to believe two contradictory things about humanity that can't both be true. The first claim is that you're just a machine. You're a biochemical machine. The naturalists will tell you this. You're a product of blind, pitiless, and indifferent evolution, and there's no design or purpose to you at all other than what you give it. You're just a biological, biochemical machine with no immateriality, no immaterial soul. The second claim, however, is that you are a god of your own making, and that comes from the post-truth culture. The post-truth culture, which was the 2016 word of the year, the post-truth culture is one that says truth exists, but I don't care if it clashes with my preferences. So that is not about freedom to decide what your life's going to be like. That's about autonomy. And autonomy comes from two Greek root words, autos meaning self and nomos meaning law. So when you're post-truth, you're not free. You are a law unto yourself. So you can decide what's real. And that's that creates a sense of being God. So along come these two cultural forces of identity ideology, which says you are a god of your own skull-sized world. And yes, you're a bit of a machine, but you can play with the machine. You can mess with the body like a Mr. Potato Head and change your reality as you like it. So you can stay God and be a machine.
Wow.
AI mania says you're just a machine. That's all you are. But take heart, you're a clever machine. And we can make a machine that's godlike. And then when it gets sophisticated enough, we can merge with it. That's what transhumanism is all about. We can merge with it and achieve godlike status. The problem with both of those is they're both fictions, and they both are subject to collapse of their own right. And we need an anchoring, something to anchor us, to keep us from saying we're gods or we're machines. We're this wonderful, beautiful thing that's kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that anchor in a moment, but this actually, when it's all said and done, denies God his role as creator, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. This is a Romans 1 thing. This is a Romans 9 thing. This is a Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 3 thing, where we are starting to worship the creation rather than the creator. And we're starting to worship ourselves. So it's self-idolatry, but we're also worshiping this machine we've created. So when we say that our bodies are our playthings or our prisons that we need to break from, or we say that, we can use technology to sort of get out of and free ourselves from the biological prison we're in, we're worshiping ourselves and we're worshiping our creation, in that sense, AI as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a serious, very serious danger.
Okay, let's talk about the anchor of truth.
Yes, absolutely. So I argue in the book that, one, there is this anchor, and that anchor is the fact that we are made in God's image. We bear the imago Dei, which is a transcendent reality about what we are. When we have this like paper-thin idea of identity, we used to believe in a thick thing called the soul. And then we shaved off a little bit of the thickness and became selves. We became psychological beings. And now we're social beings only, and socially curated beings, which are these identity beings. So now we can peel off the bumper sticker of our identity all we want and put them on the back of our Subarus and tell people who we are and what we are. But the reality is we're made in God's image, which is a transcendent reality of who we are. So it doesn't depend on cultural norms or our self-curated identities. Rather, it's transcendent and it's objectively true. And I want to say this, the Christian concept, not just the concept that God exists and made us, that's not it. The Christian concept is at the core of this because the Christian concept of humanity is based in actually God's triune nature. The word for person comes from the Latin word persona and the Greek word prosopon. Those two words were originally used not to mean a human being, but to mean a mask that an actor wears. So if you had a prosopon or a persona on you, it was artificial. It was this thing you could put on and take off. So your value wasn't because you were a human. You had value either because you acted the right way, had enough property, had enough money, or knew the right people. But you wouldn't have value in and of yourself as a human being. When the Christian concept and understanding of God as a triune being, one person of whom, God the Son, incarnates himself, dies on a cross for the sake of all of humanity equally, and then rises from the dead so that humanity who accepts this and who understands this and who embraces this can have eternal life. That was an equality given to all human beings. And so this word person, persona, was used of the Trinity. One God in three personas, and that those personas had eternal worth because God has eternal worth. And so the Trinitarian concept of personhood then was applied to human beings. And now human beings, because they have their grounding in God, are eternally and transcendently valuable. And so personhood means something now in the Christian faith. With AI mania and identity ideology, personhood is based on what you feel at the moment. And that's a terrible place to be. The anchor of truth of what you really are is found in the personhood of God. And I argue in a lot more, not complicated, but in a lot more robust ways than just the snippet I gave about how that concept not only is logically true, but philosophically true and ultimately personally true.
Yeah, rooted in the persona of God as revealed in Scripture. So Scripture is ultimate authority here, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's one of the biggest arguments I make in the book, is that, look, if you have an ancient book that with pinpoint accuracy describes the human condition, unparalleled by any other book ever since, then it's more likely than not that it has a divine source. The Bible does all of that. Therefore, the Bible is more likely from a divine source because it has this ancient wisdom that I call, borrowing from Leslie Newbigin, it is eternally contemporary. It's ancient, but it always applies relevantly in every situation. So that by itself, I think, is a powerful argument for why we should take heed to this book, which evidently, and almost even self-evidently, comes from the maker of all the universe.
You've been listening to Christian apologist Abdu Murray and a discussion of his new book, Fake ID, How AI and Identity Ideology Are Collapsing Reality and What to Do About It. It's a fascinating read, and if you'd like additional information about the book and its author, please visit firstpersoninterview.com, where you'll find informational links. That's firstpersoninterview.com. This weekly series of radio interviews are helped in part by the Far East Broadcasting Company to encourage you in your Christian journey. FEBC has entered its 80th year of faithful gospel ministry and is more effective than ever with reaching people around the world with a message of Jesus Christ. To learn more and follow FEBC's new developments, please visit febc.org. You can also listen to the podcast there called Until All Have Heard. Just go to febc.org or listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or with any podcast app. Until All Have Heard. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.